I'm David Haynes. I'm the opinions editor at the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. Welcome to this special edition of Fourth and State. We're joined today by the Senate's Minority Leader, Chris Larson. Senator, welcome.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. I want to start with a non-controversial topic, abortion.
Yeah, that's a good way to kick it off.
As you know, there has been a very contentious debate in your side of the legislature and the Assembly over the bill which would require ultrasounds for women seeking abortions and change admitting privileges for doctors. My question is, the governor has said that he doesn't have any problem with ultrasounds. He says he'll sign the bill, and he says, quote, "I think most people think ultrasounds are just fine." So what's your view on this issue, and specifically on the governor's contention?
Well, yeah, I think it's easy for the governor to say that ultrasounds, that people don't have problems with them when he's not going to have to submit to one of these forced ultrasounds that the bill, if passed, as it's written, would require. Any woman seeking a lawful abortion would suddenly be required to have an unnecessary ultrasound, whether outside, transvaginal or transvaginal. And I think this is something where it's truly disturbing. We've seen this in other states. It's pretty much putting ideology and encoding it in law. And if you saw anything on the debate yesterday, you saw how impassioned the speeches got. But you know, I think it's unfortunate that we're pursuing this far right, this ideological agenda and putting that in law. Nowhere in the debate last election was that brought up as being a priority. And unfortunately, this week alone, just this week, there are more bills concerning abortion than there are that would create jobs. So while we're pursuing this ideological stuff, this stuff that's very dividing, you know, it's not surprising that the state is sinking in its ranks and continues to be at 44th in the nation in private sector job growth.
In a news release, you characterize it as part of the war, Republican war on women. Is that how accurate is that? Is this really a war on women? Or?
Well, I think it's definitely a battle. You know, I think the battle yesterday was that they decided that women are not intelligent enough to make the decision on their own. That they would have to have some professional, not even a professional, in the room to not just administer an unnecessary ultrasound, but to describe it through a form of a lecture to them, to say, oh, here's what's going on with your ultrasound. So again, insulting their intelligence that they can't make this decision on their own. And so I think that's frustrating. And it's really showing the tendency by the Republicans to be more pro-birth instead of actually being pro-life or actually caring about women in general. I mean, if they cared, they would have. They'd be moving towards expanding Medicaid, accepting the federal money that's available. Instead, they're turning that down. The same bill that requires forced ultrasounds also shuts down another healthcare clinic in Appleton, where women, it's not just for abortions, women also receive life-saving exams and care there. So it shuts that down. So yes, I think it's a concerted effort to downplay the importance of women in our society.
So, I'm sorry, James calls it columnist. So you don't buy that argument of giving women all the information that they need and providing what an ultrasound ultimately provides so they can see for themselves?
Well, I think given the comments by the bill's author, Senator Mary Lazick, yesterday, in saying that the reason we needed to do this was because she had a few people contact her who said that they regretted abortions, but then went on to say that abortions were the thing to do in the 60s, and that you had to have one to be a woman, I think mischaracterizes the hard decision that women face when they're deciding what to do about an unwanted pregnancy. And I think that by end up questioning their judgment and encoding that in law and forcing them to sit through a unnecessary and forced ultrasound. And in some cases, to be frank, if it's the first 12 weeks, it has to be transvaginal because otherwise you can't get the imaging of what's going on in the uterus. So to force them to have that, I think it's not just insulting to women, I think it's demeaning to women.
Talk a little bit about the procedure yesterday. I know that the Democrats had some concerns about the way the debate was handled.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the majority party sort of always sets the rules for this sort of thing. What was different this time in your view?
I think there was there's a tendency to try and push this bill through as fast as they can. It was just earlier this month that the bill was originally introduced. It went through committee on Monday, and then it was suddenly on the floor on Tuesday, and they wanted to get it done as quick as possible. So we made a parliamentary procedure to delay it and slow it down so there'd be more time to figure out what was going on here, have people to be able to be heard on this. And it was up to Senator Fitzgerald to decide when he was going to have the next vote, and he decided it was going to be an hour before committees met the next day. And I think what you ended up seeing was, I think them not being able to handle the reins of power appropriately. They have the votes. They could have passed. They could pass it. All that I think that we ask in our state, and has been the tradition, is that the minority party has the chance to be able to voice their opposition and to speak out on it and to engage in a vigorous debate. And that was, as I think people saw, shut down in a very stark and disturbing way by the majority leader and by the Senate President, Mike Ellis. And I think it sets a dangerous precedent, and it takes us back to the divide and reminds us of the divide that we've had for the last 2.5 years.
So is this what happened yesterday? Is that going to foreshadow what we will see with the budget debate?
I think we're going to have to see. I think it casts a dark shadow on how we're supposed to actually engage in an open and honest debate when they decided to shut us down after one woman was allowed to speak on the bill. For that day. Everyone before that was on amendments. So you had one woman speak, then you had their side speak, actually for longer than our side, and then they decided, without letting us know, mind you, that they were going to shut down the debate. When I stood up to object, I was told to sit down.
It was a little stronger than that.
Yeah, you can find the quote on Wisconsin Eye, but it was very distinct, right, to the point where a gavel was broken while they were trying to tell me to sit down. And I think it's a disturbing sign for democracy and what it means for our state to move forward. This has nothing to do with creating jobs. It's something that's very divisive to begin with, but the way that it passed, I think, is continues to divide within our state. And it shows how fringed our state has become. With a bill like this, we're entering the ranks of states like Mississippi, Indiana, and North Carolina, where they have bills like this. And I think that's unfortunate we're going down that path instead of trying to find ways to collaborate with both parties.
Did you talk to either Senator Fitzgerald or Senator Ellis afterwards off the floor and try to smooth things over?
No, they seemed like they were in a hurry to get out of there.
Are you thinking about buying him a new gavel?
I think Mike Ellis has enough money to be able to handle that.
They may have some spares.
Yeah. I think given how this happened a couple times last session, yeah, he may end up thinking of investing in a higher quality gavel. But yeah, I would hope that this wouldn't determine what's going to end up happening with the budget. Obviously we disagree with the direction that the state will be taken with this by turning down Medicaid funds for, best I can tell, just so that the governor has a political punchline if he decides to run for higher office. It's going to cost citizens more money. It's going to cover less people. More people will not get the care that they need, as well as a tax cut that favors the wealthy, and a plan that creates a new entitlement program in our education system while we haven't funded the one that we currently have. So we're going to have a vigorous debate on that, but I suspect it'll be more bipartisan than the vote we saw yesterday.
Earlier this week, Robin Voss was in here, and he tried to argue that the budget that Milwaukee would be better off as a result of this budget.
I'd love to hear the bullet points on that argument, considering what's happened the last few years.
And I'll ask you the same question I asked him. Do you think, as a result of this budget, Milwaukee would be better off or worse off, and why?
Well, I think it's taking Milwaukee, and not just Milwaukee, but the entire state, in the wrong direction. Look, this is my city. I've grown up here and I love it. Not everybody has to, but at least hold us harmless. But I think the efforts to say that we need to move one of the facilities from Attorney General's office out of the city of Milwaukee, where they test lab results, which has law enforcement officials going in and out of it and say that it's not safe enough for law officials in the city of Milwaukee, I mean, come on. It's obvious that they just have it out for Milwaukee.
What other specific items are they attacking Milwaukee on?
Well, I think, last time we saw a cut in transit aid, and obviously Milwaukee gets the most because we're the largest city, and this time around, there's only a limited amount that's actually going to fund transit, while you actually see overall as a budget.
There's an increase this time.
There's an increase for transportation, and actually, it's to the point where, and I think you guys have reported on this, to the point where the fund rates that they've ripped on under Governor Doyle have actually reversed. So with this budget, if it's signed as it is, there's actually more money coming out of the general fund going into transportation than there ever has under Doyle that came out of it. So it actually reverses the trend that they complain so much about. It actually is a reverse fund rate. But aside from that, the other things that hit Milwaukee, they've already carved out going after the county board. Last time around, you already saw them take away the funds that were identified for foreclosure relief, and no city has been hit harder than Milwaukee by foreclosures. You saw that money disappear. And then, of course, the change in residency, which is a specific carve-out because a couple of groups that back the governor asked for it. And mind you, these are two groups that are some of the last in the state to have collective bargain rights, where they can actually go to the mayor, they could go to the city council and negotiate these things. A lot of other groups, a lot of other unions don't have that right anymore. They do, and yet they're still circumventing that process to be able to get another special carve-out. And I think that's something that'll turn our city in the wrong direction for years to come. And I think it's frustrating that that's carved out and put into this budget, so it doesn't actually have an up or down vote. If it had an up or down independent vote, like 100 other policy items that have found their way into this budget, I don't think they'd pass the Senate.
County Exec Abley got the county board bill. He was happy about this transit increase in the second year of the biennium. Any comment on how he came out and his efforts on behalf of the city?
Yeah, I mean, Chris and I get along. I backed Chris when he was running for county executive. I think that there are things where he went a little bit too far, but I think that he and the county board, now that the very public divorce that happened is finished, they're still going to have to find a way to live with each other, and I think you're seeing the results of that. While Abley may have got what he wanted from the state, he's going to have to answer to the county board about things about what happened to the former parks director and what his priorities are going to be with this budget. They still have a lot of authority, so I think that's something that they're going to have to play out more than the state's going to get involved with.
Should he be happy with this state budget?
Well, you'd have to ask him. Yeah, I think he hasn't come to me asking for too much, so I think he's relatively happy. There's things on top of it that he was looking for when they came and testified in Milwaukee, but I think he's okay, from what I've heard.
What about these issues? We talked about abortion and or ultrasound, I guess abortion, and then these cuts on Milwaukee. As we look forward into 2014 for the Senate races or and the governor's race, how will these issues play out? Do you feel that these will work for Democrats in 2014?
Well, I think there's going to be plenty of time to talk about the 2014 election over the next year and a half.
You may not be here then, so I mean we'll invite you next. So we're just asking now.
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, I think that you're seeing the pressure already. I think Senator Schultz has already known how divisive it is to follow the governor lockstep, and I think he's all but said publicly that he's all but said that he's not going to vote for this budget. So he's gone right up to the line without saying that. So that suddenly puts this budget within one vote of passage in the state Senate. So I think that puts immense pressure on those more moderate Republicans who have been around for a few governors and know that they'd like to be around after this governor's gone. And I think that the things that they have said publicly to their community and in their districts about what their budget priorities are, is going to come back and haunt them if they don't move to try and change it beforehand. So, for example, you have senators like Moulton, Petrowski, Libum, who have spoken out against turning down the Medicaid funds, as well as Olson. And so if Schultz is voting against this, and if this is when Schultz has spoken out against turning down the Medicaid funds, this is within one vote, they can't just say that they're against it. They actually have the ability to change it by knocking on two doors, mine and Senator Schultz. And that could end up being changed when the budget comes up for a vote. So I think the pressure is going to be immense on them for the things that they've said against this budget. Or on vouchers, where you've had people speak against that, like Senator Schultz, like Senator Olson, like Senator Ellis, who've spoken out against this. But now the question is, are they going to go to the point where they're actually going to pull this out wholesale, have an up or down vote on it independent of the budget? Or were they just saying that to their constituents, but they plan on voting for this expansion because the governor's twisting their arm?
People have talked a lot about non-policy issues in this budget, but how do you rate the budget in fiscal terms? I mean, in terms of the tax cuts and the bottom line, what's happening there?
Yeah, I think it's fiscally unstable. Yeah, I think overall you look at how they ended up using every dollar that they found extra on the table and dumping it into a tax cut that largely favors those who are already favored by the economy. Vast majority of it goes to people who are making over $100,000 a year. It's not sustainable. If you stay within these same brackets that they're setting up, we're headed straight for a deficit in the next budget, if not before this budget even finishes playing out.
Ellis argues that even if there's modest growth, that'll be covered.
Which there hasn't been.
Okay.
I mean, we were told that we were going to have huge growth once Act 10 passed and once the last budget passed. But ever since the governor's budget passed and was enacted, July of 2011, we have declined as a state. We've fallen further behind. We were 11th as a nation in private sector job growth when the governor took office. Now we're 44th. And last month we had the largest job losses since before he took office, since 2009. So the idea that suddenly we're going to trust them and we're going to get the jobs that they promised, I mean, I don't buy. And so I think this budget is fiscally unstable, and it's going to collapse under its own weight within a few years. So while it may feel nice to give the rich folks a tax cut, I'm worried about what we're going to end up having to cut in terms of lapses once the budget is carried out. Historically, if you go back, Governor Walker's last budget had the fastest trigger of being able to do a budget repair bill of any budget in 2 decades. He didn't do a budget repair bill because it was his own budget. If you remember, he did the budget repair bill because he had to. Mm-hmm. But the deficit was actually greater than when he did the original budget repair bill. And this was in, I think, February of 2012, that suddenly the Fiscal Bureau came to us and said that we have the ability to trigger a budget repair bill. At the time they forced lapses, mostly the UW system. So that was the last budget that was fiscally unstable before they corrected it. So I think we may end up heading for deja vu all over again.
What do you make of this decision by the governor to withdraw his appointment of the UW-Platteville student?
Yeah, I think it's truly disturbing. I think the governor has a lot of explaining to do on that. And I think it leads to larger questions about what his priorities are when he does hire people, whether it's based on merit, whether it's based on experience, or the level of expertise that a person is going to bring to a job, not just for the important role of being on the Board of Regents, but for any position within his administration. That is the priority experience, or is it political allegiance to Scott Walker?
How do you think this came about? Do you have a sense for how it developed in the first place?
You mean his withdrawal of it? From what I could tell, it looks like it came from some folks on right-wing radio who found out about this, were upset about it, and within short order, his name was withdrawn for consideration. So it shows. I think it shows where his priorities are coming from.
What was the alleged issue with this?
He signed
He signed a recall petition.
Yeah, his name showed up as being somebody who signed the recall petition, which is, you know, we're going to have diversity of opinions. And I think, look, if the governor is sincere about trying to bring our state back together, I think something like that from a student, nonetheless, you know, is this suddenly that's it for him, for his career, because he signed a recall petition? He can't be involved in state government if Republicans are in charge. I think it sets a dangerous precedent that Democrats wouldn't go down.
Another bill that's being fast-tracked is the election/campaign bill. Some Democrats in the Assembly have said that they support it. Do you like the bill, dislike the bill, and what do you like or dislike?
They voted for it yesterday.
The Senate did?
The Assembly, sorry.
Right. No, I was saying, what do you think of the bill? Do you support the bill or not?
Well, we haven't had a good discussion of it on the Democratic side in the Senate. Nobody's brought it up as we're talking in our caucus.
I mean, do you support increasing the limits for?
I haven't combed through the details of what the bill does, and I can tell you it's not a high priority as we're trying to figure out what's going on with the budget. From a larger perspective, from what I know of the bill, I mean, it's hard to make the argument that the problem is that we don't have enough money in politics. I think we should end up moving to try and take outside money and outside interest money out of the equation. I think the reason we have so many problems is because it's become, our elections have become more like auctions and less like democracy.
Although one of the arguments is that by allowing individual contributions to your campaign, that will take some of that outside money out.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have to see what happens if what happens with the bill. But frankly, I think it's putting a Band-Aid on a broken system. You know, it still continues to be a broken system, and I think it's much better if we tried to move forward with trying to pull money out of elections completely, and found a way to have citizens' true intentions more reflected in democracy than, you know, who has the larger campaign fund and who spends more in an election.
So you and Mike Tate disagree on this issue. Tate has said that he likes the idea.
Yeah.
And it'll lead to greater transparency.
Yeah, Mike and I have talked. He knows where I'm at on it.
Which is different from where he is.
It is different from where he is, yeah.
So when the Assembly Speaker was in the other day, he pointed to the tax decreases in the budget, tax cuts, as evidence of a job-creating policy. I'm guessing you don't agree with that. If so, if that's the case, I'm wondering what the Democrats' plan would be if you could have your way.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's... Yeah. Luckily, we have history to point that this tactic does not work. We heard this all the way back from Ronald Reagan on, where they said all these tax cuts were going to cause jobs, and we ended up experiencing a recession, increased unemployment, and within 2 years, President Reagan ended up having to increase taxes to make up for the lack of revenue that was something that he said was going to happen. Now, while Republicans end up, enshrining Reagan as being some kind of a saint, they forget that part of the history. So the fact is that tax cuts, don't create jobs. They don't boost the economy. What you need is to have steady growth. You need to have a healthy economy in all sectors, not just the folks at the very top, in order to make it work. People need to start spending money. People need to have an overall confidence in the economy. And right now, in Wisconsin, they don't have it. And what Wisconsin has been doing is frankly not been working. We're lagging the rest of the country, which is experiencing growth, months of steady growth.
So what do you think the policy answer is?
From a policy perspective, I think that we should end up investing in those things that our state holds in high regard, in a high priority, starting with education. I think given that we had the largest cut to education in our state's history in the last budget, I think the first place to start, if there's extra money left over on the table because of that cut, because of that $1.6 billion cut, we should put it right back where it was cut from to begin with. Until we do that, we have a values deficit in our state. And I think the other big thing we would do is make sure that we accept the Medicaid funds. I just find it morally apprehensible if we as a state at a time where the funds are 100% guaranteed from the federal government to expand healthcare coverage for people who are low income, and for some reason we deny that just for the sake of ideology, what does that say about us as a state? If we're not going to cover those people now, when the money is there, when are we?
Now, the governor, of course, would argue that the long-term effect of accepting the money is problematic because you can't count on the federal government to always match it at the level that they say they're going to match it at.
Yeah.
So how would you respond to that?
I find it interesting that he is okay with the tens of billions of dollars that he accepts from the federal government for other programs within this state budget, and that those are somehow not, those are somehow more reliable than something that has Obama's name on it. I think to have the idea, I think it's questionable for him to say that while the president was reelected, whether he agrees with him or disagrees with him, to think that the president is going to turn on his biggest initiative and somehow defund it while he is still the president. And keep in mind, this program is funded through 2016, through end of his last term in office. So he's turning it down by saying that the president may end up changing his mind on this. I think the other thing that misses the point when the governor is saying this is that there is no obligation. You could end up accepting it at any point, and you could end up turning it down at any point. And we've seen this from other states. So what I'm interested to do is, and we're going to put this forward in the budget, is saying if you don't trust it, let's do it for 1 year then. And then let's wait and let's see where it's at. If the funds have somehow dried up, then we go back to the program, but we've had 100% funding for that time. We have more money to spend on other programs. Shoot, they could spend it on another tax cut for the rich if they want to. But we'll have more money in the coffers. We'll cover more people will be cared for. And they can have an expiration on it. I think that would be a more reasonable compromise than for what the governor has.
And that's what you're going to
recommend having an expiration on it. And I think that's a more reasonable compromise than to completely turn down the expansion as it exists.
And that'll happen in the next week or so?
When we have the budget, yeah. That'll be an amendment we put forward. And given that you have senators like Moulton, like Petrowski, like Olson, like Schultz, like Leibum, and others who have all said that this is the right thing to do to accept the Medicaid funds, I think it'll be hard for them to have said that and still go down the road where they're turning it down indefinitely.
Do you know of any states that's taken that route? They do it for 1 year? And
to do it for a certain term and then look at it? Yeah. Not in the explicit sense, but what you've seen, and there may be, but I think of terms like Jan Brewer, who says, okay, we're going to take it, but we're going to keep an eye on it. It may end up changing.
On this, the idea of the amendment, have you approached any of the GOP senators about it? Do you have some hopes of bringing some of them along?
Yeah, I think that on a number of different issues, and considering that Senator Schultz has all but said he doesn't plan on voting for this budget, it puts it within one vote in our House. And I think there's got to be a few of them who don't feel like this is the best budget for their constituents and have spoken out against this budget. I think we're going to continue to have conversation with those senators to see if they'll cross over. Like I said, there's only 2 doors they need to knock on if they want to end up changing key parts of this budget. And that's mine, to bring the Democrats along, and Senator Schultz. And if we're able to do that, I think we can end up changing key provisions in this budget. And a lot of it doesn't end up meaning that it could fail completely. They can end up bringing up a lot of these things independently on the floor, not buried within this budget. But I know folks like Senator Coles, specifically, is frustrated with the number of earmarks and the number of policy items that were buried into this budget. Governor Walker himself campaigned against having all these things buried within the budget. So I think it makes sense that a lot of these things they could pull out. Shoot, they have the majority in both houses. They have the governorship. There's no reason that they couldn't just pass these things independently. So it just, it just smells of misplaced priorities that they're trying to bury this stuff in the budget.
So you've mentioned Medicaid, you've mentioned the voucher schools, and you may have mentioned something else. but what other issues in the budget do you think there might be common ground between your caucus and some of the moderates on the GOP side?
Yeah, I mentioned the Medicaid,
Yeah.
and that was the other big one where I think we can end up finding common ground.
Anything else besides that in the vouchers comes?
Yeah, I think changing the level of borrowing in this budget continues to be a concern by some of the Republicans, that it creates a huge deficit in terms of how much they bond. So I think that's a good conversation where there's common ground between Democrats and some Republicans who care about increasing the deficit and increasing borrowing in this budget.
On the Medicaid, you don't expect the Assembly or the governor to go along with your proposal, do you?
Well, it has to pass the Assembly, it has to pass the Senate, it has to be signed by the governor.
So you're talking about the first hurdle and making no mention of the second or the third?
Yeah, well, I think that they can end up having that discussion, and if we end up going to a conference committee, they can end up working it out. But I think, look, there is a closer vote total in the Senate than there is in the Assembly. And I think it's obvious by the results that came out of this budget that the Assembly got most of what it wanted. You know, where you had folks like Ellis speaking against vouchers stronger than a lot of Democrats that I've heard on the topic, suddenly cave to the point where his line was going to be that there's not going to be vouchers in his district or his community, and he caved to the point where now it's not just coming to his one of his cities, it's coming to his in every school district within his district and every school district across the state in a statewide expansion. And Ellis has been around longer than I have, and I think he knows that this idea that there's going to be caps to keep this from exploding, he knows that those caps are temporary, and that's he's got to question whether this governor, who has done everything in his power to expand vouchers, is going to hold up to his word once he's alone in his office with a veto pen, that he doesn't just cross out the caps right then and there. So I think that Ellis, who holds a lot of power, and a lot of the Republicans in the Senate who hold a lot of power, may just end up taking this stuff out of the budget. And then that's a negotiation they need to end up having with the Assembly. But the Senate has a lot of power, and I think they know that.
You said the governor rejected the Medicaid money for a couple reasons. You said for ideological reasons, and you said earlier political reasons, because he might be running for some other office. I assume you meant president. Do you expect him to run for president?
Well, from my experience of having worked opposite Scott Walker for over 5 years, I know that when we were at the county board, he was more interested in going around the state, traveling, than he was with building jobs or investing in economic development, to the point where he abolished the Department of Economic Development completely and left and once the board changed that, he left the department head vacant, along with 6 other major department positions for his last year in office. His priority was going around the state and running for higher office. And now we're seeing this with WEDC, where we've had a rotating door of CFOs coming in there. And at the same time, we're seeing scandal after scandal. Reports are showing that people don't know what's going on with these loans. Those grants that went out with job goals that weren't hitting them just had them adjusted, so they didn't have to hit those jobs anymore. So it shows that his priority isn't on creating jobs. Again, as evidenced by the fact that we're 44th in the nation in private sector job growth. So I think his priority tends to be that he's out of the state, as opposed to a governor who's long-term invested in Wisconsin. So either he's trying to build his name for his book tour, or he plans on leaving Wisconsin in some other way over the next few years. But what he's doing is not building a long-term solution to any of the problems Wisconsin's facing.
On that point, I mean, he has been, he's gone to Iowa and he's made a few other trips, but I mean, the guy is all over the state. I mean, he's constantly in the state. To make that argument, it's a little weak, isn't it? I mean, he's everywhere in the state.
He is.
He may not be in Madison, but he's everywhere in the state.
He is, but he hasn't had a public event all year. So he's having events with the press, and he's having events where cameras are there, or having events where you can pay political contribution to be able to go see him. But as far as a public event, governor hasn't had one all year.
What do you mean a public event?
An event where you would just be able to go up as a regular citizen and talk to Governor Walker, about your priorities. Something like that every state elected official almost, I always thought was obligated to do, where you know, you may get yelled at, you may get complimented, but you hear the grievances and you hear the concerns of your constituents, the average person in the state of Wisconsin.
What does he do
I
on
mean,
his
did
trips
Doyle-
to Green Bay and et cetera? I mean, I don't know, I don't follow him around, but
Yeah, I mean, when you see the alerts, it always says at the bottom, open to credentialed members of the media.
But
Doesn't
did
say
Doyle do that?
doesn't say open to the public.
Did Doyle do that? Do other governors do that?
Doyle, you could, I think, yeah, we would end up seeing him when he was out at events. At the time, I mean, I wasn't in state government, but at the very least, you would go to, I remember the state fair opening. You know, the governor would be there. You could go up to him and talk to him. He'd go hang out and go get a cream puff afterwards. But I think with this governor, it's a matter of that he's flying in, he does his press, and then he flies out. And I think it's, being a good governor is a lot less sexy than the things that happen when you're in front of a camera giving a good speech. It's that you are actually sitting down and working through problems with business owners, with average citizens, and actually hearing them out on where they want to take this state. It takes time. You know, I think, for example, there was a recent effort where he's trying to get jobs by getting businesses to move from one side of the border in Illinois to the other side in Wisconsin. I mean, playing Red Rover at the border is not a long-term solution to be able to develop jobs in the state of Wisconsin. What you need to do is figure out what businesses are in our state and how to make them grow and how to lure long-term growth. But just locating a number of jobs on one side of the border over the other, it doesn't mean that you're building jobs for the average Wisconsinite. It just means that that person has to drive an extra 5 miles to get to work.
so back on the political question, 2014 is coming up pretty fast. Is there some stealth Democratic gubernatorial candidate that you guys are hiding out somewhere? Or if there isn't, what type of person would you like to see run? And third,
Yeah.
are you thinking about it?
I think that there is always a tendency by the press, so forgive me, by the press to want the candidates much sooner than they need to be out there. And I think the thing that the governor would really like is if there was a candidate out there to put a target on right from the beginning. But I think the fact is that the story is yet to be written on who is going to run against this governor. He will have an opponent. And I would say that as much as he's getting this national attention for some of the stances and positions that he's taking and how much he is trying to endear himself to the right wing of his party, there's a mirror image to that. And that as soon as a candidate steps out, whether it is in the next few months or whether it's early next year, that mirror image will respond to the attention that Governor Walker has gotten. And I think that he will get the same level of national attention to be able to respond to some of the things that the governor has done to our state, as well as to the folks who are within our state who are looking for an alternative to the divide and conquer tactics of Scott Walker.
So when do you think it would be a good time for a credible Democrat to announce his or her candidacy for governor?
Well, I think if we're looking at a timeline, I would say either at the end of the year or sometimes towards the beginning of next year. Mm-hmm. Still plenty of time to be able to run a formidable campaign. I think of there was a guy named Ron Johnson, you might have heard of, who didn't announce until I think it was 1 month or 2 months before the Republican convention. And he ended up so he ended up announcing in May before he was running for office, and I think he ended up winning. Good check.
So was that a yes or a no in response to his question on whether you might run?
See, Dan caught it. No, I think that there's I think there's always a tendency to push whoever's in leadership into that spot. But my big goal right now is to work within my capacity as being leader of the Senate Democrats.
So you haven't given any thought to it?
No.
It sounded like, and tell me if I'm wrong, it's, to summarize your point on Walker, it sounds like you're saying ever since you've known him, he's more interested in campaigning than actually governing, and that some of the problems the state's facing now is due to that fact. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think that there's that he's more interested in the politics of it than the actual function and role of his spot that whatever he's elected to. And I think you've seen that. Granted that the John Doe investigation has been folded and bookshelved, but I think one of the things that it showed is a lot of the staff there was working on campaign stuff. And the question is whether Scott Walker was involved with that or knew of that. But I think it does show a certain sense of priorities of the people that work for him. That a lot of it is more political motivated than it is functional of helping the people that they were elected, that he was elected to serve.
So again, are you saying they didn't learn the lesson from the John Doe investigation, or not?
I think that you. I think that you'd have to see what ends up happening with this administration and where his priorities are. But I think that they end up focusing more on politics than they are on the governance of our state. A lot of this stuff, a lot of the things that are happening are done with unilateral control. While he is in charge of the Senate, he's in charge of the Assembly, there's little effort to reach out to Democrats to be able to find compromise. And I think that's why you're seeing such a divide by some of the folks who've been in office for a long time, is that there was always a sense that the pendulum was going to swing back. We're a pretty moderate state. We're one of the states where you don't have to identify a party when you go to the polls. And up until recently, we were happy with splitting our ticket. That was the thing to do. But I think now it's governing as if, that this is a red state, has been a red state, and always will be a red state. It's not governing from the middle at all, and I don't think that's sustainable. I think it's you can't govern from a political standpoint all the time and be able to move a state forward.
Do Democrats bear any responsibility for that divide?
I think given that we are in the minority, that we have been in the minority for the entire time outside of 5 months last year when we were not in session, that largely the onus falls on the governor and his allies in the Senate and the Assembly, who has the governor has had unilateral control over the state government. So I get that he has a lot of excuses to throw out there about why the job numbers are what they are, but I've never even heard that excuse that it's because of the minority Democrats.
But do you ever reach out to your Republican counterparts in the Senate? Do you do that kind of stuff?
We have, but we can't force them to bring up votes. As you
Sure.
saw, just trying to bring up a debate ends up with a gavel and a quick adjournment. But we were the first. We were the first ones. Democrats were the first ones to bring forward job proposals this session. We had a press conference. We introduced 5 to 7 bills that would have created jobs. Things that some of them had hearings, some of them had bipartisan support last session, that we are eager to try and move forward on. But again, like I said, this week you ended up seeing more bills having to do with abortion moved forward through the legislature than anything to do with jobs.
Should the next Democratic candidate for governor promise to repeal Act 10, or is that you're never going to get that genie back in the bottle?
I think that there is that's something that'll happen when there is the debate, and I think time will tell what has happened and whether it was a good thing or a bad thing. But I think that when my opinion is, and I think a lot of people have this opinion, that if you have, if you're given the choice between hiring based off of merit and based off of seniority, as opposed to hiring based off of political allegiance and based off of ideology, I think more people would end up wanting to go with experience and longevity rather than trying to take the political route, which I think is what you're seeing, especially within the governor's personal hires within his administration.
You said time will tell as to how Act 10 has played out. Have you softened your stance on that? I mean, weren't you dead set against it and thought it would be very harmful?
Oh well, I mean, I could tell you what my opinion is of it, but I think where the public is at, I think that the debate will continue on it. I mean, I disagree with the tactics of how it was done to begin with. I think that given even the school districts that I visited have grown frustrated. There were some that were supportive, but now seeing that they continue to not increase what the levy limit's going to be able to make sure that students have the education they deserve for obviously for teachers. I think they question the long-term feasibility of this.
So we're going to start to see teachers have to pass a litmus test to become teachers in some school districts? You
I think
that would be the case?
Well, I think what you're seeing is a lot of teachers end up having to make the decision right now whether they want to stay within the program or not. But I think if it's based off of something that is more subjective than objective, you leave yourself open to that possibility.
Your last election was a very, very close one, your election to minority leader. How would you describe the relationship you have within your own caucus right now? If the election were held again today, would you be reelected as the minority leader, or would you be recalled?
Well, I think that they can, they don't have to do a petition. They could end up calling for a vote anytime. But I continue to reach out to everybody within my caucus, whether they voted for me or didn't vote for me. And I consider myself lucky to be able to serve as leader of such an experienced group of individuals. They make it easy for me to lead. The level of expertise and the level of longevity of people who've served and the experience they've had means that I don't always have to be the one that's out there. We have a group of leaders. It's not just me that needs to be out there on every issue. So I think that, yes, it was a close election, but I think we have a very united caucus, and we work together really well. I mean, yesterday we had a press conference right after this vote happened, and we had everyone there except one who had to zip off to go to another committee. And folks who spoke from with one voice, and it wasn't a divided caucus. Everyone has come back to caucus to attend. So, yeah, we're very united, and I consider myself lucky to be a leader.
So if there were a vote today, it'd be unanimous? Is that what you're suggesting?
We'll see. There'll be a vote after this election for who the next leader is going to be, and we'll see what that vote ends up.
Sorry, I came late.
New guy, yeah.
You recently said that WEDC couldn't prove, it wasn't responsible for the creation of a single job. And I'm wondering what your evidence is for that. I'm writing a PolitiFact item on the topic.
Yep. If you look at what they put forward in not just their documents, but what the audit committee came back with, the Legislative Audit Bureau pointed out that they cannot account and accurately say that they have created a single job. The Audit Bureau has pointed out that they can point to a number of jobs that have been retained within the state, but they can't account for the creation of a job. Now, if you talk to WEDC and the numbers that they put forward that aren't filtered through the Independent Audit Bureau, they'll say that they created a whole bunch of jobs. But the fact is, when you have the Independent Audit Bureau, which is nonpartisan, they're the ones that pointed this out.
On WDC, at this point, what in your view is the best thing to do? What should be done with that agency at this point?
I think the governor should step down as chairman of the board. I think that they should make sure that every individual who works at WEDC is subject to the same ethics standards that elected officials are. I think that they should open up their books a whole lot more than the single annual statement that they have, which is very summarial. I think that they should make sure that those grants and those dollars that are going out to create jobs have clawback provisions, so that if a company is not creating the jobs that they're supposed to, that money is paid back. And I think what you've ended up seeing is the opposite, unfortunately, of all of those things. I think if this were a publicly traded corporation, you would have a lot of doubts about having somebody who is the main appointing authority for who is in charge of WEDC also be the chairman of the board. who therefore can limit the information that goes out to the rest of the board. I think you have the board, the other members of the board, some of whom are very concerned about having their names associated with WEDC because of the controversy and because of the problems that are associated with it. So I think those would be the good things to start, and I think you would end up, the biggest thing, and the first thing, like I said, would be that the governor step down as chairman and they start to open up the books publicly. The biggest thing is that when we end up finding out, we in the public end up finding out all these problems over there every time they're subject to having to open up their books. And this has happened 3 times. And every single time we hear the same line from whoever is in charge of it, which is, all those problems have been fixed, trust us now, going forward. And every time, you know, the public kind of nod, or the Republicans at least, nod and say, okay, we'll let you go. I mean, even to the point where the last finance committee, before the budget passed, they gave them more money. I can't think of any state agency that would be allowed to function, much less get more money, given the malfeasance that they've demonstrated.
You're talking about some changes in how WDC operates, but what about the basic concept of a public-private economic development agency? Do you think there's evidence that just doesn't work based on our experience?
I think it could work, but I think just taking, you know, a private corporation and public government and combining them is somehow going to, you know, magically create jobs is misinformed. And I think the speed at which they moved on this was evidence that they were going to be running full speed into a brick wall the whole time. And if you go back and, you know, and watch the Wisconsin I debate in the Senate and the Assembly, you ended up hearing amendments brought forward by Democrats that said as much, that you need to have protections in place to make sure that while you're creating a brand new agency of the government, that there's safeguards in place to prevent losing track of money, that make sure that there is not an abuse of power, and make sure that we know where these dollars are going. And I remember at the time on the floor saying, all we are doing is throwing a very thick curtain over what is happening at the Commerce Department, and then pretending that jobs are going to come out of it. And so it's counter to common sense.
The budget moves to the Senate next week.
Maybe next week.
Maybe next week. Where do you think you can be effective, you and your colleagues can be effective in shaping this budget, or is that just a lost cause?
No, I think it's twofold. The first is pointing out where this budget is flawed, where it is out of place with the priorities of the state of Wisconsin, and we've already talked about some of those issues on education. How, you know, this only gives $150 per pupil increase, which isn't even a third of what was cut from the last budget for education, and pointing out specifically those areas where we know we have Republicans who would agree with us. There are senators who haven't got one letter or one word of support for the governor's Medicaid plan, but are willing to go along with it, and they've got numerous contacts to support the expansion that was available through Obamacare.
Can you sway them, or will party loyalty?
I think when we put forward, and that's the thing, is it's going to be the question that they have to answer for themselves, and their constituents are going to have to ask them whether they are more loyal to their party or more loyal to the neighborhoods that elected them. So like I said, our role is twofold: to point where this budget differs from the state of Wisconsin, and the second is to hold those Republicans accountable for what they've said, and hopefully be able to bring them along on a number of different votes, where I know that they have spoken publicly in a way that they should vote for the amendments we put forward.
I want to return to the politics of Act 10 for just a minute and make sure I understand what you're saying. It sounds as if you're saying that the politics have shifted a little bit over the last 2 years. If the Democrats had control of both houses of the legislature and the governor's chair, do you think you could repeal Act 10?
I think if we had control over government right now,
right now, given the politics of how Act 10 is rolled out.
Yeah, I think our priority would be jobs, and I think it would be on that singularly. You know, I think that there's a tendency to assume that because Democrats are in power that we're going to pursue our own ideological pursuits. But I think given the state that I love and where it is right now and the need that it has, we would focus our attention on making sure that we create jobs, that we start moving in our state back in the right direction, that we bridge the divide that exists. And I think if we're up to me, I would make sure that there are Democrats and Republicans in the room to be able to make sure we find a way to sustainably move forward, so that it's not just a sudden course correction for all the things that Republicans did. Now Democrats are going to do in reverse. It's about finding a way forward. And I think to the point where the Unemployment Insurance Council was created, when we had a Republican governor, and the point was we need to find a way to be able to govern long term for our state. But these violent swings back and forth in ideology, it's not good for the average person who doesn't care about politics. So I think it's about finding where that middle ground is.
So is Act 10 pretty much water under the bridge?
No, I think there will end up being a long discussion. I think that debate is far from over. I think that's evidenced by the fact that the governor and Republicans continue to try and force this idea that it has been a savior to school districts and a savior to cities and counties. And then you have schools, cities, and counties that are coming back and saying otherwise.
Senator, you used the word malfeasance when you were talking about Medicaid a few minutes ago.
Yeah.
And some of your colleagues have called for a criminal investigation. Where do you stand on that? Do you think there's been criminal activity at this agency?
I think when the last audit report came out, it said that WEDC was not following the laws. And I think given that the Independent Audit Bureau came out and said that, I think it is perfectly reasonable for some elected officials to ask more questions about exactly what laws were broken and if somebody's going to be held accountable for them.
Can I bring you back to the tax cuts? Your message pretty clearly has been that this favored the wealthy by and large, the rich guys, that the budget's anti-middle class, but it was an across-the-board tax cut. I mean, what do you say to the person in your district who's making $15,000 a year and will get an income tax cut for the first time in 15 years? Is that insignificant to them?
I think the dollars that are associated with it, I think they would end up benefiting more if their kids are in public schools, if they're able to have their kids in a classroom where they're not fighting for attention with 30, 35 other students. And I think that's more value to that person than the $2 per week that they may end up getting from a tax cut. So again, I mean, it's the whole picture of where the state budget is. This is a $67 billion document that shows where our values are as a state. So I think when you break it down individually, it's where we want to go as a state, how it's going to help our entire society as a statewide neighborhood.
Should they have done any tax cuts?
But when you start breaking it down by individual,
right.
I think it's un-Wisconsin-like for an individual to look at the budget and say, screw everybody else, what does this budget mean for me? I think most people end up looking at it in terms of what does this mean for my neighborhood, for my kids, and for my parents.
Well, was it a bad idea or irresponsible to do any tax cuts?
I think, again, you have to look at the long-term sustainability of any of these tax cuts. Sure, we could do some, but I think if you ask most people, they're more interested in trying to figure out how we can lower property taxes, which are on average higher than they are in the rest of the country, instead of trying to do a one-time fix that largely is going to drive us into deficits in the future that we're going to end up having to figure out.
You mentioned that the governor liked campaigning and running for office a great deal. But you like elections a lot too. I mean, you got involved in a number of races this past year. How do things look next year for the Democrats in the Senate? Do you have a pretty good shot at getting control again, or is it going to be an uphill battle?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's plenty of time to talk elections over the
No,
next
but you
year,
like this stuff.
year
So
and a
do I.
half.
So why can't you talk about it now?
So I know that you can call me again in a few months. I got to give you something else to talk about.
Okay.
Senator, thanks for being with us.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
thanks so much.